Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another segment from Cypher Report. Cypher Report explores the hidden side of culture and politics to give you the tools and information you need in order to decrypt the world. I am your host and moderator of the Cypher Report, Anthony, aka Cypher, and today we are going to be talking about the Republican shrinking majority in the House of Representatives. But before we get into that, go ahead and hit that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. Let's get into it. As of our last live broadcast in December, the Republican House could afford to lose just 5 votes in order to pass legislation. This session of Congress has been the least effective majority since the Great Depression. But now their majority is so slim, it's Republicans House members who are greatly depressed. Turning now to reporting from the New York Times, day by day, thanks to a combination of coincidence, scandal, health issues, and political turmoil, the Republican majority keeps getting smaller. After the departure of Kevin McCarthy at the end of last year and the explosion of George Santos, the ever-grifting grifter of the Republican Party, the best attendance that Speaker Mike Johnson can muster is a bare minimum of 218 votes. Republican Representative Bill Johnson of Ohio leaves office this Sunday to take a job as a university president. And now there are lawmakers who are absent for medical reasons. Representative Harold Rogers of Kentucky, the 86-year-old Dean of the House, is currently out recuperating from a car accident. Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana, the number 2 Republican, is out until at least next month, undergoing cancer treatment. As a result, Republicans could soon be able to afford just a single defection on any matter, as long as Democrats remain united and have no absences of their own.
From the very beginning, we have said this should not be about any one particular individual and any one particular individual's aspirations to lead either House Democrats or House Republicans. This is about what is good for the American people, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans.
So Republicans find themselves in a real numerical bind. Given the constant fighting with the so-called Freedom Caucus, Johnson has absolutely no cushion if he chooses to rely strictly on the votes of his own party. This is part of the reason why he's cut a deal with Democrats on spending to avoid a government shutdown. Quote, "When anything hits the fan, they don't have 218 votes," said Representative Steve Hoyer of Maryland, the former longtime Democratic majority leader. Hoyer was referring to the number of representatives, a basic majority, in the 435-member House. Continuing on, he stated, quote, "They are not the majority party in this House. This is, by any measure, a problem of their own making. They began their razor-thin majority just a year ago with an extended fight to elect a speaker. In order to win that election, Kevin McCarthy was forced to agree to a rule that allowed just one member to move to vacate the chair. It was that rule that led McCarthy's ouster as speaker for the apparently cardinal sin of working with Democrats to fund the government. While a lot of the members of the House of Representatives that did vote to oust McCarthy were doing so because he dared to compromise with Democrats on a spending bill, we now know that from reporting from the Daily Beast that from text messages, the Daily Beast did review of an associate of Matt Gaetz. He did it for the petty reason of having an ethics probe against him for his supposed indiscretions. And by that, we are, of course, meaning possibly being involved with trafficking a 19-year-old girl across state lines. That change to the rules was not their only mistake. They also ended remote proxy voting, which was instituted by former Speaker Nancy Pelosi during the pandemic. Even if everybody knows exactly how they're going to vote, even if they said how they were going to vote ahead of time, say like a week or so before a particular bill come to the floor, they still are not able to log that vote due to this rule change. Kind of kicking their own ass, you know?
What the hell are you doing? I'm kicking my ass! Do you mind?
But continuing on, the Republicans now find themselves down to a 2-seat operational majority. The current vacancies provide a chance for Democrats to gain seats, and the calendar will keep others open for months. If Democrats win the February 13th special election to fill Santos's New York seat, Their number increases to 214, though Dems are losing New York Representative Brian Higgins next month as well. A special election will be held to fill that opening in Buffalo. The special election for McCarthy's Bakersfield, California seat will be held in late May. This keeps that safely Republican seat open until that election happens. The general election to fill Bill Johnson's Ohio seat will be held on June 11th, leaving Republicans without that vote for 5 months. A major uncertainty about the stability of the current party divide is whether others will bolt before the November election as well. It's conceivable, downright probable, that at least a few of them would make an early exit should the right opportunity present itself. Even with the shifting numbers, it's hard to see the Republicans' membership failing below that of Democrats, though. But it's not impossible. Because of some delays, more Democrats than Republicans could be on the floor and voting due to illness or any number of other reasons. Democrats say that if that becomes a regular occurrence, they would not hesitate to capitalize on that situation. Quote, "We'd elect a speaker," Mr. Hoyer had said. And this brings us to a quickening realization among Republicans. That is, they need House Democrats. According to Axios, House Republican leaders have been forced to come to terms with a cold, uncomfortable reality this January. They'll need Democrat votes to pass any real legislation this year. Call it governing under suspension. It's now clear that legislation can pass the House as long as there is Democratic support. GOP leaders have telegraphed to rank and file lawmakers that any consequential piece of legislation this year will be brought to the floor under the suspension of the rules.
And now we can do whatever we want! Rules are for fools, rules are for fools, save your stupid ruling for fools that need some schooling.
The procedural move essentially bypasses the House's Rules Committee, preventing conservatives from strangling legislation before it reaches the floor. And the reason why they are doing this is because during an election year, they don't want to see the government shut down or any kind of disaster happen without their ability to meet it head on over political bickering and infighting among the Republicans. My friends, we are still seeing a budding civil war within the Republican Party, and for Democrats, that is chef's kiss. This procedural move then requires 2/3 majority to pass, or roughly 290 votes, according to Punchbowl News. In practice, it makes the House look suspiciously like the Senate, when legislation typically needs 60 votes to stand any chance of becoming law due to the filibuster rules. Congress is considering 3 consequential pieces of legislation this winter as well. They are considering a Ukrainian funding bill, a tax proposal that trades business breaks for a child tax credit, and the legislation to keep the government open. As we've reported on earlier, the legislation to fund and help aid Ukraine is tied up in the Senate due to Republicans' refusal to basically work with Democrats on anything on the border because they want to give Trump a win. Be sure to check out that segment above here. Now, the hardline positions many House Freedom Caucus members have essentially forced the GOP leaders to take suspension route. And that means relying on Democratic votes. The irony is not lost on lawmakers. Quote, "The uniparty that conservatives fear becomes a real thing, because then you just have to have 2/3, one GOP lawmaker told Axios." Continuing on, they stated, quote, "Everything gets watered down. It's actually undermining their own position." And that, my friends, brings us now to the ongoing fight for a spending bill. And this is an amalgamation of reporting from the Hill, among other sources. Now, the Democratic-controlled Senate did its job and passed another continuing resolution to fund the government through March. The vote in that chamber was 77-18, a strong majority and strong bipartisan support. Then it was over to the House, where a short-term spending bill was also passed. This sent the stopgap spending bill to President Biden's desk for his signature one day before a partial government shutdown was to happen. And the president quickly signed that legislation. The House cleared the 2-step continuing resolution in a 314-108 vote. Once again, a government shutdown was diverted not by the Republican Party, but by Democrats. Democrats want to govern. Republicans can't seem to get out of their own way. This puts government funding deadlines to March 1st and March 8th, and buys lawmakers more time to finish the formal appropriations process. The legislation is the third such short-term spending bill Congress has approved in the fiscal year of 2024. For people that may not know, the fiscal year for the government is from October to October, hence why it's the third one just this fiscal year. Passage of the stopgap spending bill marks a cleared hurdle for Mike Johnson, who cut a deal with other congressional leaders to avert the shutdown. But challenges continue to loom over Johnson's speakership. The speaker has vowed to fight to secure MAGA-supported policy riders in the 12 annual appropriation bills.
Chad, I'm one of the arch conservatives, okay? And I want to cut spending right now, and I would like to put policy riders on this. But when you have a 3-vote majority, as we do right now, we don't have the votes to be able to advance that right now. So what we need to do is avoid the government shutdown. Why? Because that would unduly harm the American people. Troops wouldn't be paid. You know, we know all the effects of that. And so we have to avoid that, and we have a responsibility to do it. But this allows, as was said, as the majority leader said, this allows us as conservatives to go into the fight on the next stages of this, to talk about real border changes, policies at the border, to close the southern border, to get it under control, to talk about the oversight that's necessary on additional Ukraine aid, to get Israel done if they don't do it as we beg them to do. All these other matters in the supplemental, that puts us in the policy discussion, and we'll have stringent fights on principle and philosophy and cuts as well.
But that will prove difficult to achieve against Democrats in the Senate and in the White House. Johnson, who has only held the gavel for a few months, is already walking on thin ice among Republican colleagues. They're frustrated with his handling of the government funding and the question on whether or not to send more aid to Ukraine. Johnson last week rejected calls to renege on the bipartisan top-line spending deal he had backed just days before. In other words, he's willing to fight his right flank in order to do some government funding. This is good for Republicans if they actually do it, but the budding tensions there are maybe not good for Mike Johnson. Now, had Johnson yielded to that pressure, it would have triggered a 1% across-the-board cut, a mechanism that was included in the debt limit deal McCarthy struck with Biden last year. It's like McCarthy negotiated a pretty good deal for Republicans, and they're just not wanting to take it. Curious, that is. But under the new measure, lawmakers agreed to extend funding for 4 of the 12 annual spending bills through March 1st. This starves off funding lapses for the Department of Agriculture, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and Energy, as well as the Food and Drug Administration, among other agencies. The bill also kicks a February 2nd deadline for the remaining government agencies like the Department of Defense, Labor, Education, and Health and Human Services to March 8th. If Congress has to pass another stopgap bill in March, it would mark the 4th that lawmakers have had to pass in the current session, as deep partisan divides remain over spending. There's also concern on Capitol Hill about an impending April deadline for the automatic spending cuts if Congress doesn't finish its work on time, which is not going to be good for Republicans going into the November election, because if an across-the-board spending cut happens in April, that, my friends, could trigger a recession in July, August timeframe. And if it doesn't happen because of Republicans, they will be blamed. Make no mistake, that's what will happen. That is what history has shown us. We ended our broadcast last year reporting on the obvious inability of House Republicans to carry out the most basic legislative functions. And we're beginning our 2024 the way we ended in 2023. And Speaker Johnson may well pay the same price as former Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
Claimed in there he agreed with other conservatives, everything that we said. So there's going to be a new deal drawn up, and that's what we're in the process of doing.
We'll continue having cross sections of members in, and while those conversations are going on, I've made no commitments. So if you hear otherwise, it's just simply not true.
Characterize your level of disappointment.
One of the worst votes I've cast so far.
In the Speaker's vote for him.
In the entire 4 terms I've served, one of the worst votes I've ever cast.
Some Republicans are pushing a government shutdown until the border is secure.
And that, my friends, concludes this segment of the Cypher Report. Be sure to hit that like button for algorithms. It really does help us out. And join us next time to continue to get the tools, analysis, and information you need in order to decrypt the world.